Hi guys, welcome to another BigLipz podcast. This is episode 18. And of course, since it's almost that time, we've gone a bit Halloweeny. As you can tell, this isn't just my normal attire. So this week we are going to be talking about tricks. And that's basically involves lots of different things they do within movies that some people are maybe aware of, some people aren't. Just basically different things that filmmakers do to try and trick you into thinking you're seeing something else or etc. So basically, as most of you know, my name is Kath Maurice. With me is Sam Macaulay Blair. Um,
Hey,
Both of us are current and former film students. Basically, wanted an excuse to rant about films, so here we are. Um, so yeah, we'll just jump right into episode 18, tricks. And we'll start with you, Sam. So the way that we've done it basically is we've picked 6 different tricks, and we're just gonna kind of go through them, give examples, whatnot. So Sam, your first one was the whip pan. So do you want to explain to us what that is?
absolutely, yeah, good one to start on. To be fair, so the whip pan's one of those things that's probably a bit more commonplace than you think, and it is a very, very sort of clever trick, clever sort of cheat that filmmakers use to sort of sustain momentum and to sort of hide a cut. It's a really effective way of like basically there's a number of big name directors that out there that you would know who would who have used this trick. And I will get to them in a second. But the gist of what it is effectively when the camera sort of say it's like focused on, say Catherine and I were in the same room, or say you wanted to make it look like we were in the same room and you were filming this on a camera, you would have the camera fixed on me, and then all of a sudden you would quickly turn it to the left, so that you get a nice sort of motion blur, and then you would finish it, hold on Catherine. And basically what you usually do, I mean, some filmmakers do actually use the whip pan within a single location, but generally it's used to hide a cut. So you can really easily, when the camera's sort of moving, you can really easily cut in there because obviously it's just a blur. And the sort of human eye will not pick up the fact that unless you make it like something crazy different, but generally it will not pick up the fact that you have like put a cut in there. So it just looks like you quickly sort of transition into somewhere or someplace new. And some like it's used sort of differently by different filmmakers, as I sort of mentioned before. Like some will use it to, some will be very obvious with overt and what they're doing, and they will actually transition to like another location. Sometimes it will be within a single scene, like there will be an action, and then they'll whip round, and it'll make it seem as if the action has happened all in one. I actually watched like a a filmmaking tutorial earlier in the year. It's just on like sort of tips and sort of advice and stuff like that for sort of junior filmmakers. Just ways that you can just little things that you can do to try and sort of enhance your production. That are quite easy. And one of them was the whip pan. I remember the example they used was hitting someone with an axe. And these things are always quite funny to watch because like it's usually just like one person by themselves that's like doing the tutorial. So
Yep.
and it does highlight like the point they're making where so it's him standing in a field and he like throws an axe to the left hand side of the screen, obviously his right, and then the camera sort of tracks the axe, but like whips round, and then the next shot is him standing in the field, and the axe has just hit him, and he's falling to the ground. And because obviously you've seen, I know exactly, because obviously you've seen him throw the axe, and then the camera has moved at the sort of same speed, or just maybe just like faster than the axe. You do really buy into like just psychologically you do totally buy into the fact that he has just thrown an axe at someone, because you see like you just need to see the impact. You don't need to actually see like the axe flying through the air and hitting someone. But the sort of, as long as the sort of kineticism, the force matches up, and the actor doesn't make a complete mess of pretending to get hit by an axe, then yeah, it's a pretty effective trick. So
Definitely a good idea if you don't want your actors to be getting hit by axes and stuff.
yeah, exactly. If you see if yeah, exactly, going the other way of that, if you're an actor and you suddenly see the director scribbling out whip pan and suddenly they want to do axe throwing
Yeah,
practically, then you've done something wrong. um,
exactly.
so before I kind of, because I've been talking for ages, were there any examples, Catherine, that you had of whip pans that that you wanted to talk about before I kind of get into chatting about it?
I don't think so. I assume, obviously because we had a brief chat about it as well, that your examples are going to be the one that I would have spoken about, or a particular movie, a particular filmmaker that I would have spoken about. But I think it's really funny. I think it's such like a super, like, anyone can do a whip pan, so you don't need to be like some crazy skilled cinematographer or anything. You just literally just need to be like, whew, and that's it, and you can make something just look really cool. I think it's such a nice, easy, quick way of, like you say, making a cool transition, or doing like a cool kind of effects shot, especially if you didn't have a budget and you didn't have the money to pay stuntmen and stuff like that. It's a clever wee trick as well.
Exactly. And it absolutely. I think the thing about it is there's a lot of momentum to it. Like if you're just cutting from shots, it can be easy.
Yeah,
to
it definitely
momentum.
like it stops it from getting stagnant in any way.
Exactly, yeah, and the fact that the camera's moving, it just sort of keeps up the energy of whatever you're trying to convey. But yeah, so obviously the notable one that we both spoke about is Edgar Wright. Loves himself a whip pan, and yeah, it's again he's probably one of those people that once you start looking for it, you see just how many he uses. But it's a very, very sort of famous example would be in the Shaun of the Dead scene where they're sort of discussing their plan over where to go and what to do, and there's a lot of whip pans in that one, which again with it being like sort of, and again Edgar Wright's style is very much, he's very, very like stylistic. He sort of throws a lot at you visually. He's very, very good for that. His movies don't really kind of like lit up in terms of pacing, so whip pan is kind of perfect for him to just kind of keep his stories moving and to transition from one place or like one scene to the next or whatever. And obviously within that scene in Shaun of the Dead, it is a very effective way of that they are going, that they're like planning to go to different locations and stuff. Obviously they talk about picking up their mum and then going to Liz's, and then obviously like in the last part of the plan they go to the pub, and being able to just like whip across each time. You know exactly what's going on, you follow it, and you don't get like confused, you don't get lost, and the sort of energy of the scene keeps going. But another sort of I guess notable example would be Quentin Tarantino. There's a really good one that I saw of. It's a scene from Kill Bill. I can't remember, obviously like the Uma Thurman's character Beatrix Kiddo, can't remember who it is that she's fighting, but it's the mother basically. They're in the house.
Vernita Green.
Yes. And she throws a knife, and obviously the woman's got like, I think, a gun in the cereal box or something, and so she's like holding this box of cereal, and the knife just like hits her and impales her against like the sort of cupboard behind her. And that's like your perfect example of like the axe throwing thing of of them just totally hiding the fact that obviously they didn't throw a knife at her.
Uma Thurman didn't actually kill her.
Exactly. But yeah, like it does disguise it very well, and it is a very, very effective trick. Another one who's a big fan of it is Damien Chazelle. In fact, weirdly, there's just in sort of doing research for this, I was just looking up, like, I knew that because there was one from Whiplash that I could remember him doing where and across his films he seems to kind of use it in the same kind of way, always like very, I mean, he loves sort of music, especially jazz. He loves sort of rhythm, and obviously his movies are always about like sort of relationships between usually two individuals. So like for instance with Whiplash, there's a scene where they're sort of playing, and Fletcher, the teacher, is sort of conducting, and it's cutting between him and then cutting between Miles Teller's character, who's on the drums. And then it just keeps like flipping back and forth, and it is a good way of it's a really good way of just sort of like conveying the relationship, and also just sort of the sort of, again, there's a lot of work put into Whiplash to making you understand just how hard he's training and how sort of fast and how specific he has to go. So it's a really good way of kind of like keeping up that frenetic energy, and making it all just feel like one unbroken shot.
Yeah. Did he do La La Land as well?
He did, and there's one in that.
Because there's a really similar one, yeah. I remember seeing like a behind the scenes thing, and it's the cameraman, and there's someone behind him, and he just taps each shoulder when he wants which direction he wants the whip pan to go in.
That's right. I've seen that as well. I completely forgot about that. Yeah, because he's so like specific about rhythm and stuff, isn't he? So Chazelle, So I guess he obviously knows exactly how he wants it to play. So yeah, I think it might be him that's standing behind the cameraman getting
Yeah,
it to
that
do
would
it.
make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, in that one it's Ryan Gosling's character Sebastian on the piano, and then Emma Stone's character Mia. She's dancing, and it just kind of keeps like whipping back and forth. And again, it's just like a nice way to sort of like keep up. It's just sort of fun like way to use it. I think it's a pretty good implementation. But yeah, thank you for coming to my TED Talk on the whip pan.
Yeah, no, that was very informative. Thank you. So moving on to my first one, which is forced perspective. So this is basically a kind of technique used to make something appear larger or smaller than something else. So there's lots of examples of this. For example, the movie Elf, because obviously he's a lot taller than all the other elves. So they kind of use forced perspective to make him appear like a lot bigger than they are. But the example I wanted to talk about, shockingly, is from Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the what, sorry?
Lord of the Rings.
I don't think I've seen that one.
No. You've maybe heard of it, but who knows. So this one, like, this is one that I've always kind of been aware of, because obviously you know what Ian McKellen and Elijah Wood, you know what they look like. Elijah Wood isn't tall, but he's not like Hobbit sized. So you know that they've done something to kind of make it look like Gandalf is when he's in Hobbiton. That he says this kind of like, obviously not otherworldly, but you know what I mean. And I think it's really funny because there's different like the first time maybe you saw a picture of like in the Lord of the Rings movies, the people that played the dwarfs or things like that, and they're actually like 6 feet tall. And you've got that, like the guy that played Gimli, he's like 6.5 feet tall, but he's a dwarf. So the specific example I wanted to talk about was when Gandalf and Frodo are sitting at the table in in Frodo's house, and this was actually even more cool when I looked into it. So basically, because a lot of forced perspective, the camera has to be static, because essentially you'd have someone would be sitting here and someone would be here. So this hand looks a lot bigger than this hand, basically. It's simple as that. But with Lord of the Rings, they had to rig up this whole thing so that the camera could move throughout the shot. So basically what they did was they had this table that was kind of like in two halves, and Elijah would sit at one half, and then Ian McKellen would sit at the other half, and Ian McKellen's part of the table was on a dolly, and the camera was also on a dolly. So basically what they did was when the camera moved this way, Ian McKellen would move the exact opposite way so that it looked like it wasn't moving at all.
My God.
So like the whole bit at the table he was sitting at just moved in ever so slightly as the camera moved round. It was so cool. I'll find the video that I was watching about it, and I'll put a wee link in the description because it was so cool.
Yeah, I actually I did not know that one. That's incredible.
It's so cool. And I thought it was really funny because they did different things as well. Like, so on Ian McKellen's side of the table, they had little miniature props, and then on Elijah Wood's side of the table, they had like normal sized or oversized props to make it to again kind of like it just enhanced the difference between the two of them. So that's even just tiny things like that are so. I think they're super cool.
It does. You talking about that does immediately make me think of Little Britain though. Which, you know what, I can't remember the character's name. Have you seen Little Britain? Like
with Matt Lucas and...
Yeah, and there's the skit about the one that's like the guy that's like really short and he wants to be an actor, and they always do like the whole, whenever like they always do like a joke about like the character will pass something over and it'll be like something that obviously like really small, like I don't know, say like a rubber, and then like when they pass it over, it's always like a giant like wooden hand,
Oh,
really
right.
obviously fake, and then it's just like huge. So that's just what it makes me think of when you're like, yeah, one of them has really small props and one has really big props.
That's funny. Well, if they're using it for comedic effect, fire away.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think, yeah, I think as well, that's really, I think that would be really difficult to film and to act as well, because your sightlines would need to be,
Yeah,
you would need to be acting to like a brick wall. So your sightlines here, but actually the actor's sitting over here, and you could see in that video, Ian McKellen was talking like, oh well, my eye line is here until he sits down, and then I don't know where it is. So they have to try and figure out where it would be in the camera.
my God. Yeah, that must like. I know it really is as if it wasn't like hard enough to make those movies and stuff like that. That is just like it really does make it is impressive to see just like how much to even think of that is genuinely impressive. But yeah, for like the actors, because I think obviously a lot of people talk about the fact that like the actors will act in front of green screens and they'll be acting to tennis balls and stuff. I think sometimes it's probably less distracting because like at least if you have like a fixed thing, but to actually, especially with Ian McKellen sitting on like a dolly, or part of a table that's on a dolly, to be on something that's moving dressed up as this wizard, especially because obviously they had no idea that these movies, I mean everyone thought these movies were gonna suck, they were gonna absolutely flop, so to actually like be sat there on this set, it must have been mental to actually genuinely like put your heart and soul into the performance and not just be like, yeah, this is nuts. There's no way this is ever going anywhere.
That's such a good point. That's one of those funny like film moments where you know how sometimes if you're shooting something and you can't see how ridiculous it is.
Yeah.
But like when we shot your film recently and that we were in the kitchen and there was sleeping bags on the floor to muffle the noise, and everyone just completely ignored the fact that there were sleeping bags on the floor.
Yeah.
But if anyone else had come in, they'd be like, "What are you guys doing?"
Yeah, it is so strange, isn't it? Like just things that very, very quickly become normal when you're filming something, but like are really, really bizarre that you just kind of accept.
Yep, that 100%.
It is a very mental world. Yeah, I genuinely appreciate it. I thought you were going to talk about, because the one that I know about that I've seen like loads of pictures of that I always think about now when I watch the film is obviously when at the start when they're on the wagon, and again Gandalf or Ian McKellen is just like they've just built it so that there's like a really long bit, like a plank effectively, and Ian McKellen's just sitting on that, and Elijah Wood's sitting really far back. But the thing is, like, I think the thing with that is even with it, even watching it knowing that they are like tricking you, it still works. Like I can never see like I can never see the fault. It genuinely does. Even when you're like telling yourself that's fake, and I know how they faked it, it still like actually holds up as an effect, which I think is like makes it it's how you know it's a good trick really, because it's just like it doesn't matter if you know it, your brain still like can't turn it off effectively.
Yeah, I think it's good as well because it would be not easy, but it would be kind of relatively easier to just maybe like fire it in like an editing software and just like shrink them down or whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't know the technicalities of it, but
fix it on post.
Fix it in post, exactly. Someone said fix it in post on set, and they were like, "Nah, we're gonna do it now. We're gonna do it right."
Actually, we're going back to the drawing board, and we're gonna rebuild these sets just because you said that.
Exactly, just to spite you. No, Another example of that was, of course, Hagrid.
Was of course what, sorry?
Hagrid.
Hagrid, yes, absolutely.
That's, I think, a bit more of an obvious one because they tend to like long shots of Hagrid tends to be the back of his head, and what is clearly not Robbie Coltrane, but
yeah,
it's maybe not quite as honed as the Lord of the Rings one.
I know they must have felt a bit, because obviously the first Harry Potter and the first Lord of the Rings came out at the same time. They must have felt a bit embarrassed when like literally in cinemas at the same time, like seeing Lord of the Rings and going, oh okay, they put a bit more time in their one. That's
so funny. Imagine being the person who was like in control of that and then just being called into the office on Monday like
so have you seen Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
So we brought their guy on board for the next one.
Yeah. Clearly they couldn't get him because that persists for like a lot of the movies.
Yeah, I know. Oh dear. Well, maybe he just signed like a multi movie contract and was just like holding on to it with your life.
Exactly.
I
But
thought
no. Oh,
sorry, I
sorry.
was going to say one of the things I thought you were going to mention with Lord of the Rings as well was which I guess is kind of like a forced perspective thing, but I remember reading recently that for like certain shots of like for instance the example they used was in The Fellowship when there's a bit when obviously they're up on a big sort of snowy mountain, and Frodo like kind of falls and rolls, and then the ring is like falling off his neck, and Boromir picks it up, and there's just a shot of like pointing sort of down the mountain. You see Frodo kind of getting up, and there's a close up of the ring, and then like the chain sort of pulls it, and then obviously it cuts to Boromir lifting it up. And apparently, for like not just that, but like there's several like shots like that within like the trilogy, and to do it like because to get the actual like draw distance and the perspective and everything they sort of wanted, like obviously they couldn't use like proper like macro lenses that would have the ring like have an object that's small and like perfect focus, like everything in the background if they did would just be like a complete bloody mess, and you wouldn't be able to see anything. So they just built really big like fake rings.
Oh yeah.
So like shots like that are just like they've just got like a giant ring sitting there. But
That's
I
very
also
funny.
found out recently that Hitchcock did that quite a lot.
Oh yeah.
Not with like rings in Lord of the Rings. I don't think he was on set for that. But with like a lot of his films, and that was genuinely because of that. Apparently, they didn't like lenses, proper like macro lenses and stuff didn't really exist. Like the lenses that you would use now to sort of achieve these things didn't really exist. So I watched an essay that was actually praising like Hitchcock's composition, but for some reason just like goes on a tangent about how he has to like fake these close ups, and how like for instance there's ones of a character dialing on like one of those old timey phones that you like have to like properly spin the dial, and again it's just like a fake hand.
That's amazing. That's even funnier because Hitchcock was all about his extreme close-ups.
Exactly, like so many of them. Like there's one of a character carrying like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or something, and again it's just like wooden hands on the boards.
Wow.
Just because there was no other way to do it, so they just used fake hands, and it's just it's something I never would have noticed, but like now that it's been pointed out, I feel like, and I've not seen that many Hitchcock films, so I feel like it's probably going to ruin a lot of Hitchcock for me because I'm just going to be searching for it.
You'd be like, do those hands look wooden to you? Like anyone you're with?
Yeah, exactly. Those are your hands.
No, that's funny. No, I think
Yeah.
forced perspective is like just one of those really cool ones, especially like it's one of those ones that kind of like adds to like the magic of movies and stuff, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean, especially if you see behind the scenes photos and something like if you saw a behind the scenes Lord of the Rings photo where he had the giant big ring, that would just be really cool.
Exactly.
But yeah, so moving on from that, our next trick is your one, and this is an editing trick, which is one that we learned about when we were in our course, and that is cutting on action. So if you want to fire away, Sam, tell us what it is.
Yeah. So I guess is exactly what it says in the tin, really. So obviously when they're editing the film and they're putting all the footage together, yeah, it's basically just that's one of the things that you don't really think about. But as if once you start doing editing, it becomes a total nightmare to try and take footage. Say you've got like a wide shot of say someone's going into a car, like walking up to a car. You got a wide shot of like the car and then the street and then someone walking up to it, and then you want to cut in close, like to make the sort of action flow and to make it believable. Then you obviously would like say the person goes to open the door, then you immediately cut, and it's just the action continued effectively. Sounds like a really simple trick, and it pretty much is. But it is one of those things. Like there's a lot of like editing tricks that that you just would never ever think of. But like I remember one of our lecturers talking about the cutting when you like goes there's one about cutting on the blink. Which is like you never really see you maybe notice that you never really see actors blink, and it's because obviously we have to blink as an audience. So if you cut if you have like a two-way conversation, and you were to cut every single time, just before an actor blinks, and then cut to the next actor just after they've blinked. just after they blunk. Coining that one. I'm just going to double down on it. Don't recognise any other terminology. I was making such a good point as well.
I know, you're so on the flow of it.
But back to cutting on action. Yeah, basically, the idea is that the audience will blink. I just really want to say blink again. The audience will blink every single time that you're cutting, and they don't notice the cut, effectively. It kind of hides the cut, and it also kind of like compensates for the fact that actors are blinking or blunking. And yeah, but cutting on action. Again, I had a look at like a bunch of different examples, and there's some really sort of simple ones. But one of the more interesting ones that I found, which is a film that I don't think we've really talked about in this podcast, is Mad Max Fury Road. And I know I remember reading years ago that George Miller, who directed it, I'm pretty sure it was his wife that edited it. Oh yeah. And I think he asked her to edit it, and she was just like, not a chance. Like, I don't know anything about action movies. Like, I don't really watch action movies. Don't really care for them. I'm not like I'm the wrong person for it. And he was basically like, that's why I want you to edit this. I want someone who's who isn't familiar with action movies. I want this to feel different. But yeah, I was watching a sort of breakdown on like the editing tricks, and a lot of it is to do with like composition as well. So obviously when they're shooting it, it's something they had to be really mindful of. But for anyone who hasn't seen Mad Max Fury Road, it is an absolutely bonkers movie. The whole movie is basically this huge action set piece. It's like a car chase across a desert, with just like things flying everywhere, explosions, and people sort of running around. But you don't ever really get lost in it. Like the movie does a really, really good job of making sure that you always kind of follow what's going on, despite how fast it's all moving. And again, I watched like a concise sort of breakdown, because it's something that I've read about over the years, but I was like, if I'm going to talk about this, I should probably watch like a concise breakdown on it. And it just talks about the fact that like, even when things move across the screen, like you have characters like leap at like, driving over like on bikes, going over sort of like ridges and going over vehicles and stuff. If they land on the right hand side of the screen, then it'll cut, the next shot, something will be coming in from the right and moving to the left, so that your eye doesn't have to like jump across the screen effectively, so that they're very, very smart with their cuts, so that you always know exactly where to look, so that you're not like, it makes it such an easy movie to watch, because you just kind of naturally follow what's happening, and the movie always knows where you're looking effectively. And yeah, I think like Mad Max Fury Road, one of my favorite things about it was just like, because again, in like interviews and stuff, they talk about the fact that it was something like, obviously the movie's like two odd hours long. It's a fairly it's a very long movie for like an action scene, an action set piece. But it's like a reasonably length movie. But apparently they had, I think it was almost like 500 hours of footage. So yeah, something like gargantuan that they had. So again, like editing that, you can imagine, must have been like,
I don't even want to think about it, because that is my idea of an absolute nightmare. Like, I can't think of anything worse.
Yeah, like how do you even begin to make sense of that? Like and again, you watch the movie and it's again, it flows so well, it is so easy to follow. To think about, like, to actually go backwards and think about, like, imagine just having 500 hours of footage and going, okay, I had to make an action movie out of this.
Oh God.
And apparently, genuinely, like Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, who starred in it, I'm pretty sure they actually apologized to George Miller not long after the release of the movie, because they had no faith. I think, to begin with, they had faith in the project, but when they were out in the desert, I think there was like loads of things going wrong, and obviously, 500 hours of footage didn't come from, they were obviously out there for a while.
You wouldn't have a lot of faith. Can you imagine if you were on a set and you were like, we'll just do it from this angle, or we'll just do another wee shot here. Yeah, that would be very sus.
Exactly, and it's just cars driving about and people in like crazy costumes and stuff like that. And I can totally see how, like, it's like when you see behind the scenes pictures of Star Wars and stuff, and it's like, yeah, no one thought that movie was gonna. And again, like we're talking about with Lord of the Rings, where these things just look mental behind the scenes. I could totally see why. Like, yeah, there was big arguments with George Miller where they were just like, this movie's, they had no faith in it, and I think they like genuinely like publicly apologized when it was released, and they were like, yeah, okay, like he made a really good movie. But again, like a lot of people have talked about the Star Wars being saved in the edit, Mad Max Fury Road clearly was. And it is probably like, without you realizing it, is like an absolute masterclass in just like how to sort of like perfectly cut something so that it never ever, the momentum is never ever lost, except maybe when the movie wants it to and wants to slow down. The sort of rhythm is always maintained, and you always follow exactly what's going on.
No, that's a really good point. I haven't seen Mad Max Fury Road, and I couldn't tell you why, because I do want to see it. I do think it looks good, but I just have never. I think it's the length that's put me off, and I think it's probably like it looks very intense, and I feel like it's maybe something that you need to be in the mood to watch.
Yeah, definitely is. It's an interesting one because it is like an out and out action film, but at the same time, it's also like if you're like a film fan and you like, obviously as we're talking about just now, you really do like the sort of the making of, and you have like an understanding of like how these things are kind of done. It's just impressive to watch because obviously so much of it is practical, and so much of it is just nuts.
That's always fun to watch as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's unlike Blade Runner, I'd say it is one worth checking out.
That's funny. I think cutting on action as well is something that could be really easily like overused and make it look terrible. Like particularly if you think of maybe like certain types of action movies where you don't see a single punch land because they're just cutting on all the action because they haven't actually gotten like even just like a choreographer or a stuntman or anything like that. And I think especially when you compare it to a movie like The Raid, like we talked about before, they're not even comparable. Because sometimes you just want to see somebody getting punched in the face. Do you know what I mean?
No, you're absolutely right. Actually, that's a very good point about the fact that, and that was a trend for a very, very long time, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. It still does persist to this day, because
like a very shaky cam and lots of cuts.
Yeah, I think it was the Bourne movies, wasn't it? That sort of encouraged all that, and
the one that was in my head was Taken.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there's so many movies that, and it can be used to like effectively. Again, the Bourne movies are pretty solid movies, and you look at obviously Daniel Craig when he started as James Bond, his movies, like Casino Royale and stuff, the big chase at the start kind of utilized a lot of that. But yeah, it is. I think it got overused to the point that now people are just like, we know what you're doing, and it makes it so much harder to follow the action, like you say, if it's overused, if you're cutting all the time to just hide. Like if it's a fast fight and people are throwing a lot of punches, throwing a lot of objects, then it does just make it really hard to follow, even if even if you're not really having to jump. Again, if it's well edited and your kind of like eye line is in the right place, it can still just be a bit of a mess, especially like you get a lot of them that are in like dark houses or warehouses, and it's with two characters wearing like two men wearing like dark jackets, and you're just
and they've both got the same hair color, and like they both have a brown beard. I'm like, who's who here?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just an absolute nightmare. Whereas as you say, like the antithesis to that is like movies like The Raid, which just that actually don't have a lot of like they're very like well considered in terms of like what their camera's doing, and they make a point of showing you as much as possible, to the point that like watching The Raid and watching the sequel as well, I was just constantly floored because I was like, how did they do this? I don't know how they hid this.
That's always fun. But no, thank you for that. That was very interesting. Next thing I wanted to talk about was this idea of kind of like manipulating your surroundings to create a specific type of atmosphere or environment, or even like time of day. So basically, obviously, you and I know filmmaking can be very restrictive. You've only got a certain amount of time to shoot, or you need to shoot in a certain place. You've got budget restraints, different things like that. Or even just things like you need to consider the weather. So sometimes you'll need to film inside when you want to be outside. So for this example, I wanted to talk about an example that you and I have experience in a film that we worked on. And we've done this before. We did one of your films where we turned a primary school classroom into a hospital waiting room. So the one that I wanted to talk about was a kind of thrillery horror movie that we made, that our friend wrote, and then I directed, her last request. So basically, this it was just a short film, but it all took place within a short space of time at night. But obviously, we didn't have the luxury of time, so we had to shoot almost the entire thing in one day. So we had to start crack of dawn and finish last thing at night. So what we had to do was obviously make it look like it was dark. So what I did was just gone out, bought some bin bags, and we taped them to the windows. And it worked so well. I remember it being really, really jarring when you went into another room and saw that it was daylight outside.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? It was just really like psychologically, like it messed with you. It's like being in a casino or something and you come outside and it's, or like when you're in the cinema actually and you come outside and it's still daylight and you're expecting it to be night and you're just like, whoa.
Yeah, it was really weird. Like, and it's such like a simple, obviously it was super cheap. I just bought a roll of bin bags. It was so easy. We blue tacked them to the window. And it was such an easy way. We created this kind of nighttime feel. We obviously closed the curtains, so it wasn't just bin bags. That would have maybe given the game away. But it also had like practical advantages in that we could control the light. We didn't have sunlight streaming in the window that would move throughout the day, obviously, which is a nightmare if you're shooting one particular scene and then the light's moving all around. So we could control the light a lot more. Yeah, so that was, and then once it finally got dark, all we had to do was, because we had to shoot a scene through the window, or out the window, basically. So we just left that till last, and then by the time it was actually dark, just pulled the bin bags down and worked it that way. And then another thing I want to talk about the same movie was, and you see this a lot, but you probably don't even realise, where obviously you need to manipulate the space that you're working in. So for this example, we were in a living room and we had to make it look like an office. So we had all of the furniture piled against one wall. And it was like an unstable, rickety mess.
That's right.
And it was couches piled on top of each other. So remember, we had to just sit on the floor.
Yeah. It's so nuts that you're in a fully furnished room and all you're just staring at all the furniture sitting on the floor. All of us, like, yeah.
And so obviously we had the desk, and that was for the majority of the shoot, against the wall, because that's where most people have their desk. But for one of the shots, we wanted to get the dolly behind the desk and then come round. So what we had to do was just pull the desk out into the middle of the room. And then I think it was you that was pulling the dolly.
I think it might have been, yeah.
I think it might have been, yeah. So I just think that's really funny. Like, the shot looks normal. It looks like the desks, once we pan round to behind him, it looked like the desk was against the wall. But it's just simple little things like that you wouldn't even consider, that are just such an easy way to, like, instead of like building a whole sophisticated rig thing, we were just like, just pull the desk out.
Yeah, exactly. Not having like the ability to shoot on sets and having to use real environments is like, sometimes you want to do a camera maneuver or a camera trick that you physically, sometimes you genuinely can't do it, but sometimes you do have to think of like sneaky little tricks like that where you're just pulling a desk forwards, and it does feel really silly in like the time that you're doing it, but at the same time, like you said, like when it works really well. And it is, I think when you see it edited is when you really appreciate how like well it's kind of hidden as well.
And I think, because editing's like where it's made, because because our brains, we're so used to watching movies and we're so used to like little tropes and things that are kind of like ingrained. So if we see an opening shot of a desk against the wall, and then we see a reverse shot, we assume that the desk is still against the wall. Yeah. But that maybe like, I mean, David Fincher does it for real, but like the wall isn't there anymore and the camera's just there. So yeah, David Fincher, he goes the hard way about it. Like, just work around it. I love that he's just like, we'll just tear down walls or just build fake staircases.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is the easy way to do it.
Exactly. I wanted to say actually when you were talking about obviously making, turning day into night, etc. Um, I've not seen this film, but we were actually we looked at it as a case study the other day in class, um, and it's the Spike Lee movie, Do the Right Thing, and apparently
Do you know what? I haven't seen it either, and I feel like such a terrible former film student saying that because it's such a film student film to see.
as well literally I mean, studied it in class. Yeah, no, I definitely need to watch it, but in that we were looking at like again we're looking at various aspects of it. We were looking at like behind the scenes stuff, and cinematographer talked about the fact that so in the movie it's set on like the hottest day in the summer, so they had to be really careful about like because they were shooting it in like a real street and like where the movie's set effectively they just used the real location. And they had to, I think they picked a street that went north to south, so that this basically there would always be like one sunny side of the street and one shaded side of the street, and their sort of thinking was, well, if one side of the street suddenly like loses the sun, then we just go to the other and we just make it look as if it's now they're just in like you can just flip it and you can kind of hide it in like various ways, and you're not going to really pick up on it too much, and. But on top of that, they also had like points when the weather was terrible. I think the first I think it was like 2 weeks or something of production, something like crazy. Like it was a
Were they shooting
healthy
in Scotland?
Yes, Spike Lee loves it loves it up there. But yeah, they basically were shooting in the rain and cloudy day, and they just got like these huge lights, and they're just like beaming them down on everyone. But the cinematographer did say he's like if you look closely at some of the scenes, you can see that it's raining. Like you can see the rain.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that everyone's walking around as if it's like a really hot day and there's like loads of light on them. It just made me think of that. The fact that like I love the fact that they did their best to hide it, but there's sometimes you just can't.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, I'm sure we've done a couple of shots where you just have to pretend that it's not raining.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, so moving on to your last topic, which is a difficult one to describe, but basically you're going to be kind of talking about things where maybe green screen could have been used but it wasn't, and the kind of like different different examples of that and the kind of effect of that in movies. So fire away.
Yeah, that was much more eloquently put than I did before this podcast began. Yeah, so obviously you'd initially talked about using green screen, or talking about green screen, which is obviously a very, very helpful tool when it comes to movie making. But obviously we'd had the CGI podcast, and I think the movie that made me think of talking about, not talking about green screen, but talking about instances where you might think it would be used, was I remember watching some behind the scenes stuff on the movie Interstellar, which obviously we've also talked about in this podcast before, the Christopher Nolan film, and he boasts the fact that he used like no green screens when they were making that movie, which is legitimately
that's
like,
impressive in itself.
yeah. It's really impressive, and obviously there are special effects in the film. It's not like he's saying there's no CGI, but he kept it like as minimal as possible, and he talked about the fact that like a lot of the shots and stuff that he ended up getting, a lot of the camera like maneuvers and stuff, you wouldn't have been able to do if it had been green screen. There's obviously like an authenticity to the performances as well that he managed to get by not just having everything green screened. Like they had like for instance the ship that they're in, they had like a big rig built, and it is on like big electronic like hydraulics effectively, and it does just move around. They did liken it to like a sort of fairground ride. But again, it adds a lot to like it gives a lot to the actors. It means that they're not, they can focus more on like the character performances rather than just trying to pretend that they're like in space or in this like other part of the universe. And it's I think there's so many impressive things in that movie that you would think are effects, like towards the end when Matthew McConaughey's character Cooper is in the black hole, and I think it's called the Tesseract, the sort of bookshelf effectively, and all the sort of like ribbons of light that make it up. And that again was just like a practical set, and he's like hanging. I know that was the one when I was seeing behind the scenes of, I was like, was so weird to my brain because I was so sure that was a special effect.
Even when you said that there, I was like, what?
The behind the scenes stuff is really weird because obviously whenever you watch, for anyone, in case you haven't watched any behind the scenes stuff before, you can always, it's quite funny because you notice just how much, like, the cameras and lenses make a difference to movies, but also like the post-production, because like when it comes to like the behind the scenes stuff, obviously they don't spend ages like perfectly color grading everything and making sure it looks like cinematic, as our old lecturer would hate us saying. But yeah, so you notice immediately when you're looking at behind the scenes footage because it just looks a bit like rougher than like the standard stuff. And that was like I remember the first time I saw like behind the scenes footage of like Matthew McConaughey, and he's obviously on wires, but just like in that set, and I was like, but there's a special effect, and it was just like my brain couldn't comprehend that I was looking at something real.
That's crazy.
But yeah, even like even the water planet that they go to, I only just found out that apparently they, like, rather than, usually movies would have like a big sound stage, and they would just at the end of the day they're just standing in like knee-high water. Obviously the wave that comes is a big effect, so you would think, okay, we build get a sound stage, just basically build like a shallow pool, and then the actors can wade through it, easy enough to do. Apparently they actually found like a glacier
No way.
that was like semi like submerged, and that's what they're standing on. So they're again in like a real location for that,
crazy.
which is just so mental that they took the time to do that, and A, to find it, and B, to actually like use it. So yeah, stuff like that just kind of blew my mind with that film. And I know that a lot of the space sort of shots, one thing they used was matte paintings, which for anyone that doesn't know, a matte painting is basically it kind of predates green screen. It's kind of like the pre-green screen effectively. So they would take, you see it in the likes of Ben-Hur and even Star Wars and Citizen Kane and probably Dracula, and way more movies than you would probably think use it. But
There's one in Titanic, sorry.
Is there?
Yep.
Fantastic.
Just at the very beginning when they're playing poker and you kind of see and the ship's out the window behind them, that's all a matte painting.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Basically the trick is like you just say you have like a castle, and you want it to look like this elaborate, like sort of fantastical castle, as opposed to just like your bog standard castle, or maybe it's it's an old sort of like falling apart castle, and you want it to look sort of like you're making like a medieval set film, and you want it to look as it did. You get like a glass panel that goes over, and you just like, obviously in incredible detail, you effectively paint in the detail that is missing. You build out from the real thing and make it look how you sort of designed it. So again, like loads of classic movies kind of use this because it was a really effective way of having like big looming castles, or like big draw distance, or again even like again mentioned Ben-Hur and Star Wars. It's things like Star Wars when you have like the Death Star scenes and there's like hundreds of stormtroopers all lined up, and none of them are moving. It's because they're all matte paintings. But again, it's just another one of those visual tricks that just is like, when you notice it, you can keep noticing it, but at the same time it's just a really like simple practical effect, and it works very, very well. So yeah, that was Nolan's kind of his sort of solution, I think, for a lot of the space stuff, the black hole stuff, was to use matte paintings rather than CGI, because it does, at the end of the day, it's still like a physical thing that you're kind of looking at, and I think it does. You can still, even like computer effects and stuff have come a really long way, but I think there is still a part of your brain that can detect it a bit more easily. Yeah, exactly. And actually, one thing I was going to mention as well was a recent example of a film. So I mentioned last time on the podcast that I was like halfway through watching The Green Knight. Finished it.
Yay.
Really, really good film, by the way. Both for you and for anyone watching. Very much recommend watching The Green Knight.
Yeah.
But in that I watched like a breakdown from the director. He talked about one of the opening scenes, and in that there's like a shot of like King Arthur's sort of court. And that he used like a matte painting for that, because he said he was obsessed with matte paintings. He thought they were really cool. He really liked the sort of look of them, and he really wanted to use a matte painting. He wanted to use a matte painting in his film. So they had like a sort of confined space that they were shooting in, and they just used the matte painting to sort of blow up to totally expand it. So again, it's just, and you would never ever notice it. It's very well done. I'm pretty sure again you have like extras in that scene that are just painted in.
That's crazy.
So yeah,
that's funny.
Matte
Yeah,
paintings.
the one that I always think about, obviously with matte paintings, and I think it's just because I've seen the picture of the guy painting it, is the one from Star Wars that you're talking about with all the stormtroopers.
Yeah.
But I don't think I don't think it's noticeable at all, and I think it, like you're saying, it definitely works, especially for something like Star Wars, where the Death Star is meant to be so enormous, and there's all of these. It's like the scale of the baddies, basically. It's a really clever way as well, and I imagine a cheaper way than hiring all the extras to just cram your movie full of characters.
Yeah, exactly. It means you don't have to worry about anyone having like, you know, anyone suddenly needing to etch or anyone not standing that straight. Just be
Exactly.
Don't have to train a painting.
Love it. But no, that was cool. That's interesting. So the last one we're going to talk about is like reverse shots or reverse motion. And when I was doing my research, I found it really, really difficult to find anything about it, because the minute you type in reverse shots, it comes up shot, reverse shot, which is not what I meant, and it was infuriating. So if you do want to look it up, be sure to type reverse motion. So basically this is, again, a super, super easy, quick, cheap way to do like really cool action shots, basically. So what happens is you would do whatever action you wanted to do basically in reverse, and then you would put it into your editing software and then reverse it in that, so that it looks like you're doing it properly. So basically, I'm going to do an example. So what you would do, so if I wanted to look as if I was punching the screen, I would start here and then pull back really quick, and then it should look something like this. So that basically is such a fun way as well, as if you don't want to break your very expensive camera. It's a really cool way to like bring something towards the camera and then stop it just before it gets to the point where it's going to break something. And like I've seen a couple of examples where people have got one really funny example I saw was this shot, and they'd had like the moon was in the background, and it was obviously a horror movie, so they had the chainsaw, and they wanted the chainsaw to come up like this and then be in the shot. So what he did was he started exactly where you want the shot to end, and then you bring it down really quickly so that it looks like you're cinematically bringing the chainsaw up and stopping it at exactly the right point. And what I thought was really fun was that it's a really good way to do whip pans as well, to get it focused on whatever it is that you're ending on, because you just focus on what you're ending on and then pull it away, so that when you reverse it, it looks like you've perfectly done your whip pan and managed to focus in that split second where you've stopped. So I thought that was really funny. That's a really good way, but if you don't have a focus puller or anything like that, I thought.
Yeah.
In a couple of movies, which I haven't actually seen, but you've seen it, because we've spoken about it before, is the movie Tenet, which I think uses it extensively. But I think that's more that's more obviously for like narrative reasons, as far as I'm aware, than maybe like stylistically. And I thought it was really, really cool. When I was doing my research, I discovered that it was none other than the Lumiere brothers.
Really?
Yeah, who kind of discovered it by accident. And they did this. They'd like shot this little film of these people knocking down a brick wall, and then it was reversed. So basically, it was them kind of repairing the wall almost. So I thought that was really cool. Like that's a technique that's been around since literally like the dawn of film.
That's genuinely surprising. I never would have guessed that it goes back that far. That's crazy.
It's cool as well because that was obviously film was really, really new then, and then it just kind of presented another kind of like part of film where you then have the power to manipulate time. You can put
Yeah.
things backwards in time and stuff like that. And I think another good example, obviously, is the opening scene of Memento when he's kind of shaking the Polaroid. It reverses and stuff like that. So I think these examples are really cool because we tend to have obviously like the kind of original or older examples like your matte paintings, like you were saying, Citizen Kane and stuff like that, and then there's either new examples or it's kind of been like adapted to what we can do now. So obviously Christopher Nolan, that was a like a narrative choice in his movies and stuff. So I just think that's really funny that something like that could come from being an accident, or even things that we were talking about before where they're a necessary thing where you don't have the budget or the actors or whatever. And it can it's when it's done properly, it can like really definitely like enhance your movie, and I think make it look a bit more like expensive and well made as well. Even just something really simple like a whip pan makes it look really cool.
Absolutely. I think the reverse one is such a good example of like, because it is like you're talking about the moon and the chainsaw and stuff. It's so hard. It's so much harder than you would think until you're actually on set doing these things to get like it to just line up perfectly. And yeah, like it's such a simple fix to instead of spending like however many like hours just trying to get that like that shot to land perfectly where you need it to, just reversing it just does the work for you. And it's something that we've obviously like encountered when we've been filming as well, where like we had like a breakfast scene and someone's setting out all these objects for their breakfast, and in your head you're like, okay, well it's gonna be like this beautifully composed, they're gonna put everything down in these like specific spots, but then you're like, well, the camera's pointing at the counter, you can't just like put markers down where you want everything. And unless you actually spent like however much time training an actor to like perfectly place all these things down, the easiest way to do it is it's just to reverse, because then you start with like everything nicely composed and you're just taking it away. So it's a very, very effective trick, and one that you probably wouldn't necessarily think of that quickly, which is again why it blows my mind that it's literally been around since like the start of film. But yeah, is a very, very effective trick, and one that's actually I don't even know how much it's used. I know
it's a really difficult one to think of examples of, because it's not something that you would immediately think, because obviously they'll be very careful not to have any audio or speaking or anything like that at that point. So it's very difficult most of the time, I'd say, to tell when it's been done.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure there are, I can't remember what the film is, but I do remember reading something. I think it might have even been from like a trailer of a movie. And I remember reading like a comment thread where people were like, oh, that shot looks like it was reversed. It's just like, what? How can you tell? Like, that's insane. I know there's a famous sort of blunder. I think it might be Carrie. I think it's the end of Carrie that happens in. And I think like literally like the very, very end, and it's almost like the look's quite sort of glossy, and it's almost like a sort of dreamlike scene, and a character's walking down the street, and for whatever reason, I think maybe just to make it look that bit more like ethereal and otherworldly and a bit unnatural, they've reversed it. Obviously they've got the actress to like walk as like close to you, because again, walking backwards looks different to walking forwards, but I think they've obviously like she spent like for anyone that doesn't know.
That's why we tend to walk forwards, because
yeah, exactly. It looks oh dear. But yeah, so obviously she has like trained to do it to make it look like she's walking forwards. But there's a car that goes by in the background. So in like the finished film, you just in the finished film you just see the car like reversing down the street. And again, I think it's like I think I'd seen that pointed out before I'd ever seen the film. And it does again right at the end. And now, if you've not seen Carrie, or if it is like close to Halloween, as Catherine's jumper will remind you. So if you do plan on watching it, you probably are going to notice it now, because like when you know to look for it, it is just so glaring, and it does amazing. Completely just like shatter the moment.
I saw an example as well, and I think it's from one of the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes movies, where they've got like there's a little ape in a cage and it's like crying for its mum or whatever. But they showed me in the clip that I was watching. They showed a section of the clip, and it was like glaringly obvious because it like cut. So the ape was like here, and then suddenly it was here, and then it would just start crying again. I was
Oh,
like, why? Who allowed that to be in there?
in
Do
the
you know what I mean?
movie.
That's obviously like the editor's been like, I've had enough.
In fairness, if you've seen that movie, then I
I
don't
really
really blame the editor.
I haven't.
You haven't seen it?
No, I haven't seen those
Oh,
terrible ones.
oh, it is. It is, and it's almost in like a league of its own. Like it is one of those films that, yeah, you just kind of watch and you're like, I genuinely can't believe that that they were like, good job us. Like clearly the editor was just like fed up and was like, no, okay, I know what this film is. To be fair, the editor spent the most amount of time with all that footage, so probably was driven insane.
That's true. Yeah, maybe that was just the point where they cracked.
Yeah, you can see the very moment.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, I think that's a good point to stop. But I thought that was super cool. I think as a film fan slash nerd, it's always fun to like to talk about even just little things in films that are really interesting that kind of that you wouldn't think about, and especially because we've made a couple of films or short films or whatever now. It's funny how you just even quickly you pick up different things on set where you're like, oh well,
Yeah.
we'll just do this instead.
Yeah, exactly, and it's something funny about it. Yeah, it almost feels like you're discovering it for the first time sometimes when you're on set and you end up doing these things.
Yeah.
And they do feel like the cleverest tricks in the world. And they like you sort of mentioned before, they can add a lot in terms of like production value, and just sort of like they can just hide shoddiness and stuff sometimes. So they go a really long way. For anyone like planning on or ever any desire in attempting filmmaking, they're good tricks to know.
Yeah.
And they are like, again, some of them are easier to pull off than others, but there's always like with all these ones that are sort of mentioned, I think there's a way to kind of get them all done on like a relatively like low budget or no budget, if you're kind of like dedicated enough. And yeah, it's interesting to know as well. I think it's just interesting to chart like the progression of like these movies, and how they sort of evolved and all the tricks that they sort of like developed over the years. And again, there's like the green screen and things like that, and CGI are like the really obvious ones that everyone is super aware of. But it is crazy sometimes when you start looking into just how many there are that you just never ever think about.
Yeah. And I think unless you're like actually interested in like film theory or film trivia and stuff, that you're not going to notice certain things, and you're not going to maybe even like you're just not going to understand how they did that shot, because there's obviously
Yeah.
movies that I'm watching and I'm like, how did they do that?
Exactly. And I think that's absolutely like I feel like that's high praise if you watch something and you're genuinely just like on a technical sense, just like how did they pull that off?
Yeah.
2001: A Space Odyssey for me, like I've only seen it the one time, but just absolutely blew my mind because I was just like, how did they do this in the 60s?
Yeah.
Like we
That's
hadn't
crazy.
even like got to the moon yet, and they were doing this.
That's such a good point. Well, is there not the theory that Kubrick filmed the moon landing?
Yeah, like I mean, to be fair,
I mean, NASA's obviously seen 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. They were like,
That looks legit.
yeah, that's better than what we were gonna do. Like, let's get him over here.
That's funny.
Oh dear.
But no, thank you very much for that, Sam. It was very interesting as always.
Thank you.
So obviously 2 weeks time will be your podcast, episode 19. So yeah, I'm excited to see what you come up with. And
Me too.
as I say, I'll try and get that video that I was watching about the Lord of the Rings thing, even just like for yourself to watch. It's just so cool. I'm not even a fan of the movies, and I was watching it and I was like, wow.
Yeah, I definitely need to see this, so that'd be good. Thank you.
Cool. No worries. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. See ya.
Farewell.